Hello, friends. This is the Netarts Friends Church podcast. We are Jesus people, Kingdom of God people, welcoming, yearning, sharing. And we're glad you're connecting here with us. We'd love to connect in person as well. If you're inclined to support this podcast or for more information, just hop on over to netartsfriends.org. That's netartsfriends.org. Let's jump into today's sermon. A small private airplane crashes in a remote location. Search and rescue and emergency services are deployed. The pilot is in critical condition. Family members of the pilot gather at the hospital in the surgery waiting room. Hours pass. Finally, the surgeon walks out of the operating room and says to family members, "I'm so sorry. The pilot died. We did everything we could." Minutes later, the surgeon walks into the waiting room and says to the family, "I am sure that today has been a whirlwind for you all. I want you to know that we think the pilot is going to live." How can this be? So in our Sunday gathering, we turned to a neighbor and just offered a guess. If you happen to be connecting online, I'd invite you to just take a moment to think about your answer. How can this be? All right. Well, the answer is that there are two different pilots. There are two different surgeons. There are two different families. There are two different outcomes, even though there's one scenario. It's a silly little riddle. Now, perhaps you thought right away, oh, there have to be two pilots. But if that was not your first thought, then you probably entered into some mental backbends and contortions trying to figure out how can a pilot die on the table and then come back to life. You were wondering if it's a jellyfish sting or a snake bite or a near drowning in super cold water or low blood sugar or a strange coma, or did they do one last shock? Was it a miracle or a spiritual healing of some kind? Something else? But as soon as you consider that, oh, maybe there were two pilots, then everything clicks into place. In our gospel passage today, in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus tells a parable. And it's a story that initially causes you to feel like you have to do all kinds of mental backbends and contortions to try to make sense of it, until you realize, in a similar way, wait a minute, maybe it's not all about one character, one plot. Maybe it's about two different sets of characters caught in the same dilemma, but with two different outcomes. Now, the story that Jesus tells is not about an airplane crash. It is a story about stewards and lords and mammon, which is like your relationship to money and wealth and economies of this world and stuff. So let me set the scene just a little bit, and then we'll read the parable. So the story starts in Luke chapter 15, verse 1. That kind of gives us the setting. The tax collectors and the sinners were all gathered around Jesus, and they were listening. And these sinners, these sons of the world, were becoming Jesus's disciples. And meanwhile, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, the sons of light, were muttering, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Now you're going to hear lingo in this parable. You're going to hear about the sons of the world and the sons of light. And don't miss the intentional irony. Jesus is using the same word from the story he told the prodigal son and the older son. He's using that same word again. It's like this replay of the younger brother and the older brother. And now he's using it again, talking about the tax collectors and the sinners as sons of the world, and talking about the Pharisees and the teachers of the law as sons of light. So, here's the story Jesus told. Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose steward was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be steward any longer." The steward said to himself, "What shall I do now? My Lord is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg." So that is situation number one, character number one. That's Lord number one, steward number one. That's the first story. Here is situation number two, Lord number two, steward number two. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he called in each one of his Lord's debtors. He asked the first, "How much do you owe my Lord?" 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The steward told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450, a 50% discount." Then he asked the second, "And how much do you owe?" 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, "Take your bill and make it 800. That's a 20% discount." The Lord commended the dishonest steward because he had acted wisely. For the sons of this world are wiser in dealing with this generation than are the sons of the light. And then Jesus went on, he says, "I tell you, use the mammon of injustice to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much." So if you have not been trustworthy in handling the mammon of injustice, who will entrust you with things of true value? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two lords. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and mammon. The Pharisees, who loved money, heard all of this, and they were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight." All right. Just like the Pilate story, if you read this parable of Jesus and think that it's about one Lord and one steward, you will find yourself doing some really weird mental backbends and contortions to try to make sense of it. Many Bible scholars have said this is the most difficult of all of Jesus's parables. And it's interesting that those who say that it's difficult are often treating it as if it's about one Lord, one steward. However, there are biblical scholars who recognize, like, I'm not on something new. There are biblical scholars who recognize, oh, it's two lords, two stewards. It's an ancient form of storytelling called metalepsis. Remember the key to the parable. Jesus says it plainly, you cannot serve two lords. So it's a story about two lords and two stewards and two loves. And as soon as you realize that, everything snaps into place. The reason that the Pharisees were so furious and sneering with contempt at Jesus was because they knew that they represented the first steward, serving the first Lord. They represented the rich man. They were the sons of light that Jesus was talking about. Now, to connect with this story, the plight of every steward was that they were caught in the crossfire between the top 1%, like the landlord class, the uber rich, and the majority poor. It was as close as you could get in Jesus' day to middle class comfort if you were a steward. It was a world of limited goods where the rich were getting richer and the poor were getting poorer. And a lot of that had to do with how the lending practices of the top 1%, the rich, how that was being managed by the stewards. So to connect with the Pharisees, because Jesus is telling a parable about stewards to Pharisees. So the Old Testament law forbid charging interest on loans. For instance, Leviticus 25, if any of your fellow Israelites become poor and they're unable to support themselves among you, help them as you would a foreigner and stranger, so that they can continue to live among you. Do not take interest or any profit from them, but fear your God, so that they may continue to live among you. You must not lend them money at interest or sell them food at a profit. I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God. Now the Pharisees had figured out a workaround for the entire Jewish economy. They said that charging interest was only prohibited if it was a loan of immediate necessity. So that means that if you have $1 and you need to borrow another $1, I can charge you interest because you already have $1. The only way that I couldn't charge you interest is if you actually had nothing. And so everyone was charging interest. It was condoned by the Jewish civil courts. The interest rate was never written directly into the contract. It was hidden. It was called increase. And interest rates, what scholars can find appear to have been in the general range of 20 to 50%, depending on the loan, money, or crop. All of this was having a devastating impact on people in Jesus' day. Debt, slavery, homelessness, starvation, lack of well-being. The rich were getting richer, the poor were getting poorer. So stewards, Jesus is telling this story about stewards, they were stuck in this situation where their own well-being felt like it was dependent on participating in this economic system that was centered around earning a profit, biggering and biggering, charging interest. That's the name of the game. The bottom line is the bottom line. Profit matters more than people. And they were the boots on the ground agents who were actually doing it. They were charging the bills, collecting the debts that was causing more and more people to lose farms and livelihood and become enslaved. To put it in the terms of the Pharisees, by offering this economic system a religious, like a free pass, they were getting this nice cushy ride. The Pharisees, who were lovers of money, the story tells us, they were directly profiting from participating in this economic system of injustice, corrupt inheritance laws, corrupt loans. But of course, as the story goes, it's like, what's the alternative? If you were a steward and you refused to play the game, you would be accused of being wasteful, which that's the story Jesus tells. You'd have to give an account, and your rich Lord would only give you so many strikes before you're out. You're fired. And so if you got fired, you probably weren't going to stand a chance in this world. You'd be humiliated, it'd ruin your reputation and your resume. And so Jesus tells this picture of like this person who's saying, I'm not strong enough to dig, I'm ashamed to beg. And it's this picture. It's not someone who just is saying like, I don't like manual labor. It's a picture of someone losing all their connections, all their resources, taking a major pay cut. And like, if this happens, they're saying suddenly my options are going to be seriously limited. It's not about their willingness to work hard. It's about their ability to earn a livable wage. And so the plight of the steward in this story is that it feels like there really is no option other than I just have to go along with the rich man. I have to play along. So that's the picture Jesus paints of the first steward and the first Lord. Does any of that picture sound familiar? Have you ever wrestled with any of that? So in our worship gathering, we actually had a worksheet so that we could do some writing. And that first question, just to do some journaling, some process, it said, I relate to the pressure, the pull, and the fear that the first steward experienced in the following ways. So take a moment, and even if you don't do any writing, just reflect on that. All right. Jesus paints the picture of the second Lord and the second steward. The second steward represents the tax collectors and the sinners, the sons of the world who were coming to Jesus. The first steward, he could only conceive of two possibilities, like either you've got to play along with the rich man or become poor and enslaved to the man. But the second steward, he is not afraid to think creatively and come up with a third possibility. He says, I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, he knows that's coming. People will welcome me into their houses. And so he gives discounts to his master's debtors. He gives one a 50% discount. He gives another a 20% discount. What is he doing? Well, you remember all that interest that was charged on the loans? He's giving it back. You remember the story of Zacchaeus, the tax collector, coming to follow Jesus? As the story goes, Zacchaeus stood up and he said, Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. If I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. That's Zacchaeus deciding to give back the mammon of injustice, the interest, the increase. He's doing the same thing as the steward in Jesus' story, his parable. The steward in Jesus' parable knew that he was going to lose his job, just like every tax collector knew that giving the mammon of injustice back to the people it was taken from, yeah, that comes at a cost. They knew that they were going to lose their job, but it also meant that they were finally handling the mammon of injustice in a trustworthy way. So the second steward wasn't just thinking about his own well-being. He saw his well-being connected to the well-being of others. He was putting people before profits. Instead of sacrificing relationships for the sake of mammon, he used mammon to build relationships. And so he entered into the release of debts, which is central to the ministry of Jesus. It's been a theme of God's story all along. God had always been trying to teach his people a rhythm of erasing debts, land being returned to original occupants, slaves being freed, land being given a rest, providing for the poor. This is the principle of Jubilee, Leviticus 25. Do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward the poor. Rather be open-handed and freely lend them what they need. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed. Jesus says, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he's anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed. There's that word, release. To proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. That's that Jubilee principle. Jesus teaches, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Freely you have received, freely give. When we set these two stories side by side, two lords, two different stewardships, they reveal two different value systems, two different kinds of wisdom or intelligence. And so Jesus uses this word, phronimos, in the story. It's maybe your Bible says he acted wisely, maybe it says he acted shrewdly, or he was clever. It's this word, phronimos, is having wisdom, it's being enlightened, it's insight, it's intelligence, it's being in your right mind. Now, the first kind of intelligence or cleverness in that first story about that first lord and first steward uses numbers to evaluate everything. The bottom line is the bottom line. The second kind of intelligence, the second story, it puts a higher value on people and well-being and relationships. The second Lord praised the release of debts and called that having wisdom, being enlightened, insight, intelligence, being in your right mind, which makes absolutely no sense if you're just looking at the numbers. And so Jesus finishes his story by speaking directly. I tell you, use the mammon of injustice to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it's gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling the mammon of injustice, who will entrust you with things of true value? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two lords. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and mammon. So I want to stop here and consider these two stories, these two lords, two stewardships, two different relationships to mammon, and offer you space to consider your life and listen to the Spirit. So the reflection question, we had another writing, journaling, reflection question on Sunday. Here it is. When I hear about the creativity, the courage, and community that the second steward experienced, what comes up within me is, then it's blank. So go ahead and reflect on that. When you hear about the creativity, courage, and community in that second story, what comes up within you? We did not end our Sunday gathering in a place of just trying to work this out individually. We ended our Sunday gathering by being in community, sharing stories with one another. So here's the discussion question that we ended with. If you're listening with someone else, I'd invite you to talk about this, or maybe you can just have a conversation sometime later this week with someone where you process this. Here's the question. When you've placed a higher value on the well-being of people and relationships than the numbers and the bottom line, what has been your experience? Thank you for joining us for a Sunday sermon from Netart's Friends Church. We hope you'll join us soon for one of our in-person worship gatherings. For more information, hop on over to netartsfriends.org. God's peace be with you, friends.